I was the first and only out transgender faculty or staff member. I did my best to represent not just being trans, but being a good person. I mean, I wanted to feel comfortable. I knew that there were some parents who would look at me sideways, particularly parents that come from maybe very conservative cultures. But I wanted to put them at ease and demonstrate. So I wasn't riding around in tube tops and mini skirts and high heels. I was busy teaching, and that's what I loved to do and was very good at doing. I didn't want to play to any of the negative stereotypes of trans people. I worked hard and I thought I did a good job. And again, the vast majority of the community seemed to be very happy to have me there.
What do you really know about people who were born transgender? Have you ever met someone who's transgender? Well, if you're like me, you're curious but hesitant to ask questions. Well, welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. In our conversations with people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and the professionals who support them, we ask probing questions and discover insightful and educational answers. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Now let's get right into today's episode. Well, hello and welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Thanks for tuning in today. This is a place where you're going to hear real stories, honest conversation, and authentic voices. And we bring them to life from people who were born transgender, their families, coworkers, and healthcare professionals who walk alongside them. I'm Lynn Murphy, one of your hosts. I'm an author, speaker, leadership coach, and founder of Women Who Push the Limits. And I'm the cisgender half of this team. Joining me is my amazing co-host, Wendy Cole, who is a transition mentor, insightful coach, and living proof that it's never too late to embrace your true self. So together, Wendy and I are bringing you conversations that we hope will open minds, touch hearts, and inspire change. So share these stories with those who are ready to learn about the transgender experience. And now, today, get ready for a fascinating conversation as we welcome our guest, Tommy. So Tommy's a semi-retired high school history teacher who first came out to the New England transgender community in 1993 and then began living full-time as her authentic self in 2015. Music has always been a part of her story, from pounding drums and playing guitar in punk bands in the 80s to later writing and performing her own brand of country music across the United States. And through it all, music has just been both her outlet and her lifeline. And last year, Tommy moved to Maryland to be closer to her children and grandchildren. And since then, she's gotten deeply involved in promoting trans visibility in the nation's capital. She works passionately to support members of Maryland's and Washington, D.C.'s LGBTQ community, especially those who are transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming. So today we'll hear Tommy's story, not only of resilience and transition, but of how she continues to create belonging and visibility for others. So Tommy, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Lynn and Wendy. It's great to be here.
Welcome. We're glad you're here, Tommy.
Let's go back in your life and start with your family and your upbringing and what life was like for you as a kid.
As a kid, life is pretty good. I was very lucky to win what we might call the birth lottery. My family never worried about having enough food in the refrigerator or, roof over our head and so forth. In fact, my siblings and I all attended sort of the finest private schools and universities and, fun vacations overseas or skiing out west or whatever it might be. My father was a reporter for Time magazine, but he inherited quite a bit. It was passed down from my great-grandfather, who was a very successful banker. The first 50 years of the 20th century and amassed quite a fortune that has somehow managed to continue to be passed down in bits and pieces. So life is pretty good. I was not an unhappy child. I did not come to really understand how I was different until I was about 10 or 11. Before that time, I sort of made my way in my world, and I was the youngest of four and tried to keep up with them, but fell short in many ways. I was terrible at swimming. I tended to sink, and I was terrible at riding a bike. I had this ridiculous granny three-wheeler till I don't think I learned to ride a bicycle till I was about 10.
Before 10, did you realize anything about yourself?
No.
Or any awareness?
I know, and I
Oh,
was
okay.
pretty clueless about the whole idea of gender. When I was 11, for example, I was playing a game of show and tell, sort of with a bunch of my cousins, discovering our bodies.
Yep.
And a female cousin of mine, we were of the same age, said, "Oh, I'll show you mine." And she, dropped her underpants. I thought, wait, where is it? Are you tucking it? I didn't even know that men and
Um,
women, or biological men and women, had different parts between their legs. I was
wow.
so clueless. But maybe that's a consequence of growing up in a very sort of waspy, preppy family, that in that very British tradition, Victorian British tradition, you don't
Mm.
talk about sexuality or sex and, private parts and so forth. And, husbands and wives sleep in separate beds and have separate, if they're wealthy enough, have separate bathrooms. And
Right.
um,
That's all part of the Western European heteronormative culture that we live in.
yes,
And
absolutely.
you had a very set family like that.
Yeah, I got it in spades. Um, but yeah, I was about 10 or 11 when I sort of realized, oh, wait. And that was the first time I started trying on my mother's and sister's clothing. We were living in Canada at the time, where my father was stationed by Time Magazine. I really enjoyed it. But the odd thing was, I was also still very much doing boyish things. I had emerged as a decent athlete. I learned how to play ice hockey in Canada. I played a lot of sports and was very sort of outdoorsy, and I had lots of male friends and so forth, and had virtually no conception of women. Although by 10 or 11, I was starting to view women as something to be adored effectively. And so once I started trying on my sister's clothes, I thought, wait, this something's wrong here. Why am I doing this? This is crazy. I'm a boy. I'm not a girl. But I just couldn't stop myself, so that continued.
So how did it feel to be wearing girls' clothes?
It wasn't a sexual turn on. It was really just kind of cool. I liked the feel of the fabric. I thought I looked good in the mirror. And at my age now, at age 63, it's hard to remember in a lot of detail what that was like. But I do remember that as the youngest child, my siblings sort of moved away in their teens to first boarding school and then on to college. So I had a lot of time alone in the house, and my parents were, it seemed, were always going out to cocktail parties or dinners. So I had plenty of time to try on my mother's clothing, and sometimes the clothing that my sisters had left behind when they were at
Mhm.
boarding school or off to college. And I fit that clothing because I was younger and therefore
Right.
not fully developed into the larger person I'd become.
So at what point did you learn about being transgender or have any kind of representation or, find information about that? When did that start to develop for you?
So it really wasn't until age 30 that I came to get a sense, first of all, that I was not alone, that there were other people like me, and that those other people who were like me were not all mass murderers or serial killers or
No, really?
psychopaths. And that's, of course, the only representation I had seen, whether it was Hitchcock's famous film Psycho or Brian De Palma's Dressed to Kill. Michael Caine in drag is not a good look, by the way. Great actor, but ooh.
You got
Um,
that right.
But nobody lost their minds over cross-dressers who were famous actors, right?
Right.
yeah, this is true. Oh, it's interesting. I when I started buying things, that I discovered this wonderful store in Greenwich Village, New York, where I ended up after Canada. We moved there in 1973, and by early 80s, discovering um, where it was possible to go in New York City to buy a size 12 and a half or size 12 women's shoes, for example, or, wigs and all these things. And that was a very famous store. It wasn't around more than several years. It's called Lee's Mardi Gras Boutique. And I found out about it in the back pages of this Village Voice, famous New York
Yes.
newspaper. And I called because there was no address given. So I called, and then this, disembodied voice on the other end of the line said, "We'd love to have you come into the store. We're located at 14th and like 11th Avenue, which is basically the meat district.
Yes.
And this is where the carcasses of cows and sheep and lambs and other bovines would come in to be butchered and sold off for retailers. And it was not a very happening neighborhood. And it also was a place where very few people ventured, your
Right.
average New Yorkers. And so there were a few gay bars already established in that area. One of them, famously, the Ramrod, which is a leather
Mhm.
bar. But this store, Lee's Mardi Gras Boutique, rented space over one of the still existing meat packing places. And they said, you'll find a phone booth on the corner there. Go to the phone booth and call. So I went to the phone booth and I called the number, and the person answers, says, okay, I can see you. I can see that you're a reasonably normal looking human being. Okay. You don't strike me as a cop. That's good. You
Mhm.
come up and basically go catty corner from the phone booth, and you'll see a red door marked number so and so. That's an elevator. Come up to the second floor. In my mind, I am petrified.
Mhm.
Now, of course, I understand their own security concerns.
Right,
But
because in those days, police would arrest you.
exactly. I thought, oh, this is going to be a sting operation. I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to get outed. My whole life is going to come to crashing end. And I was at the time maybe 24 years old or 23 years old. Anyways, I entered the store, and lo and behold, oh my God. Yeah, it was a proverbial trans
You were in
candy
heaven.
store. I was in heaven. Just row after row of big hair and shoes and
Yeah.
gowns and everything and feathered boas. It was just spectacular. And the people there couldn't have been nicer. It was so amazing. But the interesting thing is, I was talking with the sales clerk, and saying, "Oh, I can't believe I finally found my store." And she's going, "Oh yeah, it's great when people come in. And did you know that we even get some famous clientels? For example, some famous actors." I said, "Really? Who?" And they mentioned that Richard Harris. I don't know if you know Richard Harris,
Yeah.
a standing actor, but apparently, yeah, he would come in and he had a secret life that very few people were aware of.
So you said when we were talking to you before that you came out to your trans sisters earlier than I think you said you transitioned in 2015 to living full time. So what happened between the 90s and 2015?
So I got married in '88 to my best friend who I adored, and we then moved to England, went to graduate school, and I thought marriage, of course, would put a stop to
Fix
this
you.
behavior, exactly, exorcise the demons from my soul.
Exactly. That's why I
Um,
got married.
yeah. And of course, it didn't. So my now former spouse and I are roughly the same size. And so when she was off at work or away, I could, try on her clothing. And then, anyways, I did buy a few things from nearby stores in England where we were living, and I put them in little plastic bags, stuffed them on the top shelf of the closet, way in the back. And this is a really tall closet. We're talking a good 8 feet. You need a stool to get up to this top shelf. I thought, no way my spouse will find these things. I came home from my graduate work one day, and she was home, and there was my bag in her hand and said, "I found this in the back of the closet, and it's full of women's clothing. Any idea where it came from?" And I said, "I don't know. Maybe the previous tenant or the owner of the apartment. I don't know." And he's looking at me, and I think sense I was a little nervous, and I'm not a very good liar. Um, and she said, "Wait a second. Are you having an affair?"
Right.
And it
But
took
she didn't have any idea about your
Yeah,
cross-dressing or
that's correct. I did not tell her, and she would hold that against me for
yeah.
many years thereafter. Yeah, it took me almost 24 hours to convince her that I was not having an affair and that I was committed to our marriage, that I loved her. And again, the language, the only terms that I was aware of, I was not yet aware of the term transgender. I think it was probably another 4 or 5 years before I heard that term. So, crossdresser, that was used, transsexual, transvestite.
Those were the
Um,
terms in the 20th century.
right. And I didn't consider myself a transsexual. That seemed just a leap too far for me. And transvestite I associated with more with sexuality, like the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Mhm.
Frankenfurter, the main character, describes themselves as a transvestite, and I'm like, I'm not Frankenfurter like. That's I'm not bisexual and blah blah blah. So
Did you have ever any influence from the Christine Jorgensen story?
Not really. I might have been aware of her. I did, when I was in England, I bought a book, a memoir by a British trans woman named Caroline Cossey. She transitioned quite young and actually became a model and then actually was in a James Bond movie.
Oh,
Hmm.
really?
She passed so well, especially post surgery, that she was given a job as one of the Bond girls in the
Right,
second or
yeah.
third Roger Moore film. And you'll see her in the pool scene hanging out at the pool in a bikini with all the other, cisgender young women. And it wasn't until the film came out and that someone basically outed her and it became a big sort of mini scandal. But it also speaks, of course, to the fact that she was just an attractive woman. And
Yeah.
Exactly.
what did it really matter?
When I
Yeah.
heard about Christine Jorgensen, that was the term I adopted for myself under age 10, transsexual.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I think I was maybe intimidated and scared by that because
It is
the
scary.
the idea of transitioning gender just seemed totally impossible. I mean, at the time I was married and had a good career, and I
Mhm.
thought there's no way I'm going to jeopardize all of that by, transitioning like a Christine Jorgensen or a Caroline Cossey. I was aware of Renee Richards because my
Mhm.
parents and at least one of my siblings were huge tennis fans. I was definitely intrigued by Richard's story. But again, it all seemed too much a leap of faith.
Back in
India,
that time, too, you had to be quite well off in order to make it happen.
yeah. I mean, that was not my problem.
Right.
I probably could have done that, but I grew up in a fairly rigid environment. In some ways, if you look at a lot of the early transitions along the gender spectrum, people who transition gender, and they tend to come from two socioeconomic groups. They tend to come from either the very wealthy, who, as you point out, Wendy, can afford the transition, whether it's top surgery, bottom surgery, facial surgery, all the things that might make us look better in terms of appearance. But you also saw a lot of people transition in the poorest communities where people have the least to lose because they have so little.
Right. Exactly.
I came to learn about that in New York City. I mean, I may have crossed paths with Marsha P. Johnson or Sylvia Rivera and other early pioneers in the transgender movement, but I wouldn't have known them from a hole in a wall. I saw people like that in New York City. You walk around Greenwich Village in the
Oh, yeah.
1970s and early 80s, and you would see people who, many of whom were readily identifiable as being either cross-dressers, transvestites, or transsexual. But for me, it just seemed like a leap. Sadly, of course, those poorer people on a gender spectrum who did have the courage, far more courage than me, for example, to come out and live their lives authentically, the price they paid was far greater than for people who were wealthy.
Did the poor people transition socially but not transition medically?
Yeah, few of them could afford
Or this-
Yeah.
certain kind of things. Now, some were blessed with bodies that made it work. You've probably seen the famous 1992 documentary Paris is Burning, which is anyone out there watching this, if you have not seen it, you have to watch it. It's a beautiful, touching, and powerful documentary. It's also an important piece of the gender community's history. And it focuses at one point on one young Hispanic woman who passes very well. And she made a living in the sex trade, but she would be murdered by a client, by a John, as they call them. And that was in the film. When they started finishing up the film, she was killed. And so that
Wow.
full story is in that documentary, Paris is Burning.
Wow.
Yeah.
So all this time that you were not thinking you were going to do medical transition, what was going on in your life, mentally, emotionally? How were you dealing with that?
Well, again, I was blessed with being married to a remarkable woman who gave me space. When we returned from Britain in 1991, we moved into a house in Rhode Island where I was teaching. And our eldest child had been born in England. He was about 6 months. And then we'd have two more children shortly thereafter. And I had a good career. I really enjoyed teaching. Felt very lucky to be doing that. And I had a wonderful family life. I adored my wife, and the children were just the cutest things you ever seen. Um, and yet I had this what struck me and surely my spouse and eventually my children as a slightly odd behavior. Um, and I had two lives. I compartmentalized who I was. And the two never meet, or never met, I should say. I, in 92 or 93, joined at the instigation of my spouse. She discovered Tiffany Club of New England, what is today Trans Community of New England, the support group, which its origins date to, I think, 1979. And, it was founded in a private house in, Boston suburbs, a western suburb of Boston, by a fairly well-off individual who offered her house as a safe space for trans people. And she herself was a trans woman. When I joined, the club had actually purchased, or was, excuse me, renting a clubhouse space in Waltham, Mass, over a auto repair garage. And they were in in-house club meetings, or the space was available to club members every Tuesday and most Saturdays, I believe. And it was really interesting. I contacted Tiffany Club in New England, and they said, "Oh, come on up this Tuesday or next Tuesday." I said, "Sure." And it's in the middle of winter. It's dark at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. And I had dressed up because I thought, okay, I should, go as, because my spouse would give me, in our new house in Rhode Island, give me some closet space. And so I had this wardrobe. So I drove up there, which in itself was kind of dangerous and interesting. But I got to the clubhouse, and again, I was petrified. Is this another scam? Is this a Waltham police sting operation or something? But of course, it wasn't. It was a wonderful little space, a very safe space for trans peoples, the vast majority of whom were white trans women, middle class, upper class, who lived in the Boston suburbs. I used to joke we were the desperate trans housewives of greater Boston. And yeah, mostly we just hang out in the space, which is all of about 1,000 square feet, with a sort of living room or den where there were magazines and a television and a stereo. There was an office, there was a kitchen, a little table, and a changing room and a bathroom. And there were rarely more than 25 people in the space at once, although membership was, I think, close to about 100 when I joined.
That was an outlet for you, definitely.
Huge outlet, huge outlet. It was a stress reliever. To be able to dress as a woman, as a person I am today, felt incredibly relaxing. It was, oh, this is who I am. I'm so, so grateful to be able to do this. Of course, whenever I was dressed as a woman, there was a knock on the door, panic mode. Oh my God,
Right.
get the hair off, get the makeup off. And teaching at a boarding school made that a little problematic because I ran a dormitory and there were often knocks on the door. So it was pretty far and few between when I was able to find time to actually dress up.
So then, Tommy, you socialized apart from your family,
That's right.
but your wife knew
Yeah.
you were doing this.
She did, and she felt that this is probably healthy for me. Then I think she started getting a little concerned because I think I started doing some things that if she gave me an inch, I took a mile, right? If she allowed me to take this little space in the closet, next thing you know, I'm pushing her clothes over here, and my wardrobe is expanding, and that's on me. I shouldn't have done it, but I'm so desperate to be who I wanted to be. But she then started digging deeper into the transgender community, and what what you came across, not surprisingly, this is the beginning of the internet, the World Wide Web in the 90s. She's coming across a lot of sex sites or, pornographic sites and so forth. And she's probably thinking, oh my God, what is going on here? Because it's not like there's the Transgender Medical Association or the Association of Transgender Lawyers or all the boring trans like me. So I think she was beginning to panic, and she did sort of wonder, what are you guys doing up there? And I was like, it's actually kind of boring. We're just sitting around. Tiffany Club in New England had since the mid 80s hosted a major event, which was long and still called First Event. It's still going on. I went last year after a little hiatus up in Boston, and we'll probably go again this coming year to support this longtime organization now called Trans Community of New England. The conference was a great conference. It's a very safe space. And it's a mix of vendors selling things such as wigs and clothing, shoes and jewelry, and offering services, whether it's legal services, mental health services, and so forth, but also some celebrations. So there would be workshops from health professionals or from elderly trans people offering advice on voice, on comportment, on dress, and so forth. And then, of course, there would be dancing and there would be banquets. And so it was really fun. And that is still at the core of the First Event conference, although I think now it's grown substantially. The first one I went to, there were all of probably 100 people there. And just before COVID, the conference peaked at close to 1,500 attendees. But last year, I think there were only about 500. Yeah, to your question, Lynn, I think it became harder on my spouse because I kept trying to take more space, and the more she gave, the more I took, and that made her nervous, and not surprisingly so. Yeah.
Were you doing anything hormonally at that point?
Oh, thanks for asking. No, I was not. Actually, let me back up. So I did, find some trans magazines that were not pornographic. There was I don't know if it's still in publication. I think it's Transgender International or something. And the beautiful models. And it was almost all trans women. And I saw in the back advertising for hormonal treatment or, building breast tissue and so forth using black cohosh. You can buy it as a supplement. It's a root from the cohosh plant, and it basically turns muscle into fatty tissue, but it's extremely dangerous because it can really damage your liver. And I started taking it in like 94, and after a few months, um, my stools started to get problematic. And then I started getting dizzy after one dozen. I'm like, whoa, this is not right. I stopped taking it. And that's when I learned that it's extremely dangerous. What I know now is that black cohosh can really do a number on your liver and prove fatal if you're not careful. But I didn't go on any estrogen, any hormones.
Even back in those days, if you did that, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do it through a doctor.
Right, right.
My endocrinologist told me that he lived in Greenwich Village while he was going to NYU Med. He saw girls dying from sharing needles because that was back also when you couldn't go into CVS and buy a package of needles. That's why 2012 was so important for us to get medical care.
Absolutely.
Because all through the 20th century and into the first decade of this century, it was all do-it-yourself stuff.
Yeah.
And dangerous, like you said.
extremely dangerous.
So when did you decide to first come out, and what was the catalyst?
Well, that I was going to finish that. I did get some electrolysis on my chest in the mid 90s. I got tired of, as we used to joke in Transphobia, of mowing the lawn. I think it's when I went to a first event and someone, a trans sister said, "Oh, someone forgot to mow the lawn." Not that I had a lot of chest hair, but it was really, I was grateful for that. But it wasn't until probably 15, at least 10 years later, that I started doing laser hair removal on my arms and legs. And around 2008 or 9, started electrolysis on my face.
Okay.
But so when did I come out, Lynn? So my wife, that was back in 1990. And then my children, my eldest son discovered in a similar way as my wife. It was accidental. Even though I had attended first event and gone to workshops where the very intelligent workshop host had said, come at your children when they're roughly between 8 and 12. Because if you do it earlier, they probably won't really understand what it is you're saying. If you do it later, they're in their teen years and they're already consumed with all the challenges of adolescence, puberty, and so forth. I ignored that. But anyways, my eldest son, at age 14, I think, around 2004, had asked to borrow my laptop to write a paper for his class. And I said, sure. Well, on my laptop were hundreds of photographs of me that I had taken in our home when I was dressed as who I am. He gave me back my laptop and I went to go look at some of the photos and they were all gone.
Oh, no.
And instead, there was a note that he had written on a Word program saying, who is she, Dad? End this now. Oh, no. He thinks I'm having an affair. Of course, part of me is thinking, well, one, I'm so proud that he's standing up for his mother and telling his father to, don't cheat on mom. Secondly, I'm thrilled that he didn't recognize me and that I looked good enough in the photographs that he didn't recognize me. But I knew I had to tell him. So we sat down and had the conversation. I explained I'm a crossdresser, or actually transgender is the word I used because that was what I was using at that point. And I explained, I love your mother. I have no intention of leaving you or her, and I'll always be your father, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, okay, all right, great. And I had the same conversation with his younger brothers when they turned roughly 13. And that was great because that meant that around the house, I didn't have to be so careful about what I was wearing. And there were times like, I would be wearing a silk blouse or something, and it didn't bother them. I had to be careful, of course, when their friends came over, especially again at a boarding school. Even when we got out of the dormitory and we're in a standalone home, sometimes my boys would bring their friends over. So I had to, sometimes race up when I'd hear them at the door, race upstairs and totally change out of whatever I was wearing. So my family knew who I was for much longer than anyone else.
Interesting that you had this opportunity to kind of be less stressed at home, because a lot of people we've talked to don't have that. But to have a little more ease there with your family.
How did you feel when you were dressed versus when you had to take everything off and put it all away? At that stage, how did you feel?
I hated taking everything off, and I loved being dressed. And I thought I looked gorgeous. And I think what's hard for a lot of cisgender people to appreciate, particularly the partners of people who are transgender, non-binary, whatever, is that this is not narcissism. Yes, we may take a lot of photos of ourselves and like looking at ourselves, but this is because it is affirmation of who we can be. It's no different than a teenager who wants to see themselves looking good, because when you're a teen, you can see society's expectations of what good looking means, what attractive means, and you want to be that. And so, like, cisgender teens, trans people who are still in the closet crave the ability to look beautiful. The irony is that I haven't taken any photographs of myself except for a few selfies here and there since I came out in
Exactly.
2015, because I don't need that affirmation. My affirmation
Right.
is that I'm out is who I am.
That's right.
Yeah.
My wife gave me the option after she found out about me after we were married for 4 years. And she gave me the option to cross dress. I tried it. I hated it. It hurt so much to take everything off.
Yeah.
So I never cross dressed again until 2014.
Mm. I was super grateful to my spouse that she put me in touch with the Tiffany Club in New England, because being out with trans people let me get through those teenage years. Because a lot of us would go out as the comfort level rose, the confidence level rose, we would go out to dinner. Actually, right down the street from the garage clubhouse was
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like um, Sal's a family Italian restaurant. And we, four or five or six of us would go to this place on this Tuesday night. And for some reason, Sal or whoever the owner was had no problem with us. And maybe we were good tippers. But we certainly ate our share of food. But he and his staff were wonderful, and they would sit us at a table, and we would get stares as we walked in from a lot of the patrons, cisgender patrons. They're like, "Whoa!" Um, but it was fabulous.
So what
But
prompted you to actually come out? And you
yeah,
did it in 2015, right?
yeah. So,
That was the same year I did.
awesome. The problem with being in the closet for my family was that all the lying to their friends about who their father
Mm-hmm.
or spouse was corrosive. They were covering for me. I was covering for my real self. They were covering on my behalf. And that was really hard, particularly on my spouse. She felt there was a part of our relationship in life that just it wasn't public, it wasn't free, it wasn't authentic. And she increasingly wanted to be a part of that. I said, I don't know if I really want you coming to first event. And I didn't want her coming to the first event conferences because I felt I couldn't be myself with her around, because I'd be walking on eggshells. Like, is she really, am I going to be too effeminate? Is she just going to say, this is gross, I can't handle it? She did come to one first event, and I was so proud of her. We actually went to one of those workshops about children, and this is after I come out to our eldest and maybe his brothers, and we talked about being a trans parent, being transgender as a parent, and she was great. But it's still, as I said, it was really corrosive. And by 2014, she just really was beside herself. And I didn't quite understand that. I mean, like a lot of marriages, the marriages can get a little stale. People can fall out of love. She didn't say our marriage was boring. I wasn't boring, but she did say it was problematic because she said, you want to be a woman. The difficulty is that she assumed that because I wanted to be a woman, and she was correct in that, of course, that I was a gay man, that I wanted, she thought that all these photographs of me and dressing up was an attempt to be attractive to men, to entice the opposite sex. So she began to suspect that I was going to keep pushing the envelope. And, she didn't like the fact that I had done hair removal on much of my body. And so she basically in 2015 said she needed out of the relationship. And it was extremely painful for me. But it also was an opening, that old saying, one door closes, another door opens. It really was true in this case, because by walking away from our marriage, my now former spouse allowed me to be who I am. Because,
Totally free.
yeah, because if I wasn't going to grow old with the woman I loved and expected to remain married to for the rest of my life, I needed to find out who the heck I was. And
Mhm.
so I did that. I actually did start dating very soon after she decided to end a relationship, and was dating some women. And I presented on, this is through one of the older online dating sites, and I presented as a man, as my former self, to women. So man seeking woman. But when I went on a date, if I liked them, I would say to them, you need to know this about me. I'm a trans woman. And of course, I'd have to explain that. One of them replied, oh, does that mean you were once a woman and now you're a man?
Mm.
I explained to all these women, I don't know where I'm going being a trans woman. I look like a man, but in my soul, I'm a woman, and I may fully transition. And in most cases, that was a deal breaker for all these, cisgender
Yeah.
women. I get that.
So
And
you didn't date as a woman then. You didn't
I
present
did
as a
not know.
woman.
I dated as a man seeking women. And yeah, I was a pretty wild and woolly ride for the next year.
Were you teaching at the same time when you transitioned?
Yeah.
How did you
Lynn,
come
I just
out?
wanted to, Lynn, if I could just back up a little bit, I just wanted to say
Sure.
that in the last year of my marriage is interesting. I was actually having a great year because my spouse seemed to be indicating to me that she would be okay with me transitioning and we would remain spouses. She had read and loaned me her copy of She's Not There, the terrific
Mhm.
memoir by Jennifer Finney Boylan, who
Yeah.
transitioned in the early 2000s and remained married with her longtime spouse. And I thought, oh, yeah, I want to pull a Boylan. Um, and then she at another point said, let's go to the theater and you can go as who you are. And that was the first time she ever came with me in public, aside from being at first event in that closed
Mhm.
space.
Right.
So I thought this is great. But what she was doing was actually trying to figure out how far do I want to go?
Mhm.
And it became clear to her that, yeah, her husband is transgender, it's a trans woman, and she just can't keep
That's a
up.
deal breaker.
It's a deal breaker. Yeah.
Mhm.
So Lynn, to your question about teaching, I came out in summer 2015 to my boss and I said, transgender, I don't know if I will transition, but I will present as a man for the next 3 years because I knew that I had a full year sabbatical coming up in 2018. My employer had a huge endowment, the school I worked at, and very generous faculty perk or benefit was this endowment after every 10 years of teaching.
Mhm.
So with this year off, I knew that I could, really explore and maybe get surgery and so forth. And that's, of course, what did happen. In fact, I didn't wait within 24 hours of finishing my last commitment of the school year in 2018 in the middle of June. I woke up and threw out almost all of my men's clothing and said, this is it. I'm transitioning. I'm full time. So I came back in the fall of 2019 to teach as a woman, and it seemed to go pretty well. It is interesting to note that before I transitioned, that the last 3 years I was working as a man, when I came back in the fall of 2015, I learned very soon that news of the breakup of my marriage had spread everywhere,
Oh.
and news that I'm transgender had spread everywhere because I had come out to many family members that summer 2018, siblings, cousins, and lots of old friends, including many colleagues at the school who I was close with. And apparently the word got out, chatter, chatter,
Oh,
chatter.
it took on a life of its own and just
Exactly.
spread.
So much so that many students were aware that their teacher who was presenting male was in fact transgender. But it didn't bother me at all. They
Did
knew
you
I'm transgender. It's no secret. That's fine. And I didn't mind wearing men's clothes. All the undergarments were my female undergarments, and occasionally would wear a very flowery shirt or so forth. I mean, I wasn't working very hard to present male. I certainly wasn't working hard to cover up where I was inside. I wore my little gold heart locket every single day. I still wear it every day. But I think I was doing great teaching, by the way. It's very interesting. As a woman, I learned that I was much less intimidating to the students at my school. And I ended up having many more students, particularly girls and students of color, come to me for extra help or
Mhm.
speak up in class to
I'm not
engage me.
surprised.
Yeah, I think I was much more patient, more forgiving, more understanding of minority.
Also much more comfortable with yourself, and you were no longer hiding your secret.
Yeah, yeah,
That's huge. That
yeah,
makes a
yeah,
huge difference in your personal everyday life.
yeah.
And did you get any pushback from the kids, either those 3 years you were dressed as a man or after you transitioned?
I worked at the schools 21 years as a man, never had a single student complaint, or at least one that arose to a meeting with the head of the school. But in 5 years teaching as a woman, I had two students raise objections or complaints in which I ended up meetings with the head of school. And became clear to me upon trying to figure out their complaints that these students didn't like me because I was transgender. It made me sad because the vast majority of the students seemed perfectly comfortable, perfectly accepting of who I am. I was using the girls' bathroom, I was coaching and doing all these things. And here's an interesting story. Every teacher at the school would be given what they call advisees, a group of roughly 4 to 8 students who you sort of shepherded through their school experience over the years. You made sure they were in the right classes, they were in the right non-academic activity, that the college process was going well for them, whatever it is, you got to know them and their parents and so forth. When I taught as a man, I always had trouble holding on to the girls who I was assigned as an advisor. And not surprisingly, many of the times those girls didn't really connect with me. They might have had girl issues, whether it was their bodies or, dealing with mean girls on campus, whatever. And they didn't know how to approach me and talk about it. So often they would, at the end of the first year, leave me and take on another advisor, almost always a woman.
Mhm.
That flipped when I came back to teach as a woman. First of all, I was given more female students to advise. They almost always stuck with me. I did lose one of the boys who had been assigned to me. He went to a male advisor.
Mhm.
Um, and my girl advisees were fantastic. And in fact, two of them who graduated in my second to last year, I'm going to have dinner with them down here in DC in 2 weeks. And
Wow, that's so nice.
yeah, that's I think I was better for them, but it's worth noting that they're important to me because their support was so helpful and so wonderful to experience. And their continuing support is so
Mhm.
important to me. Yeah.
It's wonderful to hear that you had a good experience as you transitioned. We had spoke with someone else too who said her career was much better after she transitioned. So it's
Well,
interesting, you give up the male privilege. And I don't know if you want to talk about how that felt to give up the male privilege, but you saw benefits from being your authentic self.
yes, I certainly, there's something like learning about male privilege when you give it up voluntarily or maybe lose it involuntarily. It is frustrating for me because my former employer actually has blackballed me from teaching at other schools down here in the DC area. And that doesn't break my heart, but it makes me sad that so many young people who I think would be totally supportive of me are not getting
Hmm.
the benefits of my knowledge and wisdom as a longtime teacher.
Why did they do that?
Because my former boss is just a very grumpy, transphobic individual. I mean,
Okay.
when I came out to him, he said in 2015, it was only the end of his first, maybe second year at the school, and he wasn't confident that he had the support of the board of trustees and parents and so forth. By the time I came back as Ms., he was in his second 5-year contract. And then my last 2 years, he just signed his third 5-year contract. He had the board in his pocket. While he did fantastic work diversifying the school in other ways, in a way that myself and so many colleagues deeply appreciated and supported, he was not comfortable with members of the faculty or even the student body who are LGBTQ. And after I left, I really worried. Actually, my last year, many of the LGBTQ students on campus were quite concerned because the school administration did not seem to be supportive of their challenges. And we saw some nasty incidents of bullying or harassment of LGBTQ students. I teach adult ed now, and I'm very happy doing that. I'd love to get back into teaching young people, but life moves on, and you got to make, lemonade out of lemons.
It seems like the students would benefit from having the representation of someone who is transgender,
Yeah, I was the first and only out transgender faculty or staff member. I didn't make this case to my head of school because he just was not a good listener. There was no way to change his mind. I'm the first openly trans adult on the campus. And, I did my best to represent not just being trans, but being a good person. I mean, I wanted the parent to feel comfortable. I knew that there were some parents who would look at me sideways, particularly parents of international students who come from maybe very conservative cultures. But, I wanted to put them at ease and demonstrate. So I wasn't riding around in tube tops and mini skirts and high heels. I wasn't.
No.
My face wasn't made up with heavy makeup from MAC. I was busy teaching, and that's what I love to do and was very good at doing. And it makes me sad that there is no representation there. I didn't want to play to any of the tropes or negative stereotypes of trans people. I worked hard, and I thought I did a good job. And again, the vast majority of the community seemed to be very happy to have me there. And so there we
I
are.
think that's what's
Life
important.
goes on.
Well, no, but to me, that's what's important is for people who are cisgender, who have no idea what it's like to be transgender, can meet somebody and get to know them on a personal level so that they see it's not scary, fearful stuff like the, current regime is trying to do, but also for students who are questioning, do they know what's going on? Do they have someone that they can talk to about some of those things? And I don't know if that ever happened with you. Yeah. A role model, but also, like I said, for someone who's cisgender, just seeing that you're not that horrible, scary, terrible person who's eating children or whatever they say. I don't know.
Grooming. I've been grooming children for 4 decades to be
Grooming.
mature, knowledgeable, morally, good human beings, intelligent beings.
This is why I feel it's so important to put people like you on our show to show that we are perfectly normal people in
I just
most
remember.
respects.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. I'll take boring and normal as good. The problem is, Wendy, that of course the far right today call people like me and Wendy groomers, right? We're pedophiles and so forth.
They've ramped up their rhetoric.
Right. And so my second year is teaching as a woman, a student who had returned the next year, my second year as a woman, returned that year in a different gender. They had been in the boys' dorm their freshman year. They came back sophomore year as a girl and were put in a girls' dorm. Now, I don't know if that's because they saw me the previous year and said, wow, if the school is comfortable with having a trans teacher, then they should be comfortable having a trans student. I don't know if that's the case, but a conservative would say, oh, that's the problem. We wouldn't have trans kids if we didn't have trans adults, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like there's any way to convince these people that no, those trans kids will always be there, even if they don't present as being transgender, just like trans adults.
So you're quite active in your volunteer work in DC in that area.
Yeah, as soon as I got down here, I thought this is gonna be wonderful. I'm gonna be close to my eldest son, my eldest grandchild, free museums, and Harris will be elected. What could possibly go wrong?
Oops.
Oops. And right away, I joined a support group near me in Montgomery County, Maryland, not because I needed support, because I thought I would be able to offer support to a lot of folks there. And sure enough, there were an awful lot of younger people who identified as trans or non-binary, gender non-conforming, who were suffering. A lot of them are federal employees or federal contractors, also military, who were, very quickly aware of the challenges that lay ahead. And then once the administration came to office and you had those first of several anti-trans executive orders issued from the get-go, the anxiety and concern really elevated in this support group. It's been hard to watch these folks suffer and to listen to their horrific stories. Is many of whom come down from sort of the western rural regions, of the rural regions of northwestern Maryland, that is very much Trump country, where these young trans people have unsupportive family members and unsupportive communities, churches, etc., and are struggling, many of them, to make their way.
Are there homeless?
Some of them are on the margins. Montgomery County is outstanding in providing aid to homeless people or unhoused people here in the county. A Pride Center just opened a block from my apartment in downtown Bethesda, and the schools are generally supportive. So I don't think we see the same amount of homelessness, but certainly on housing. You're probably aware of Pink Haven, that nonprofit that sort of works like battered women shelters, basically helping, just as the latter help women get out of a dangerous situation with partners or communities. Pink Haven gets LGBTQ people, largely trans people, out of unsafe situations. But I also have been involved with legislation, not on a national level, but more on the state level of Maryland, lobbying state senators and legislators to pass certain laws. But I have, just as in the introduction, Lynn, you talked about trans visibility. That's so important. So last June was World Pride in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, many international visitors did not attend because of concerns over whether they'd be admitted through U.S. passport control and how they would be treated once they were in the District of Columbia. But there were lots of great events. I invited a young trans man from Maine, where I spend my summers. And this fellow transitioned in about 2011 while attending college in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so he made his way down here to Bethesda for a week, and we played tourists. We went to the mall and to the museum, Smithsonian, and so forth. But also one day we went to visit his congressional representative. Mine is the mighty Jamie Raskin. Yay! But my friend from Maine, we went to visit his congressional representative, Shelley Pingree, in her office on Capitol Hill. And that was really interesting because we go through security. They don't ask you why you're there or who you're visiting. We just went through security. And then we were walking the halls, and the halls were filled with people. It's so much fun because there's so much activity in the hallway. And there we are, my friend and I'm this tall, big bone trans woman who some people might not read as trans, but sort of stand out in other ways. My friend, on the other hand, who's relatively short, although is a trans man who represents as male, has this long mane of rainbow-colored hair and was wearing a cowboy hat and t-shirt and blue jeans and big work boots. And so the pair of us are wandering through the halls, whereas everyone else is dressed in formal attire. All staffers have to abide by a congressional dress code, which is coats and ties for men, and for women, dresses or skirts and blouses. And so we were getting lots of stares. The only way to tell with the folks who were Republican or Democrats was whether the stare was more of a sort of scowl stare or a frightful stare, or was a sort of interesting stare. Oh, interesting. But it was important because my friend and I were making a point. We weren't just going to visit my friend's congressional representative. We were intentionally walking the halls of the congressional office building to say, we belong here too. This is our space too. We are citizens and voters in the Republic of the United States of America. And so get used to it.
Right.
I don't know if we were successful or not, but I've done that now 3 times. Walk through the halls. I haven't been back to Congress, to the Capitol itself, but I'll get there eventually.
So the burning question is, did you use the bathroom there?
So on this occasion, walking with my friend, I did not use the ladies' room. I did on 2 other occasions. The other 2 occasions when I was there, I did use the ladies' room. One occasion it was recess, congressional recess, so the halls were virtually empty. The other was less so, but no problem. My friend did use the men's room in June. no problem. No one confronted us or complained. Again, I think most people are just, not paying attention.
Yeah.
What I would love to see, and what I've actually toyed about as an activist, the idea of going there and doing what my hero this past year did in Florida. This young woman, I think when she did, she was 21. Last February, she decided to go visit friends in Tallahassee at the University of Florida there. And she decided to go use the ladies' room. And she's a trans woman. She was going to use the ladies' room in the state capital of Florida in Tallahassee. She emailed the state police authorities at the Capitol building, said, I will be visiting the state capitol on such and such day in late February, and I'll be using the ladies' room at this particular time. I hope you won't arrest me. And she arrived with a friend who recorded this on her cell phone. There were two state troopers outside the door of the ladies' room. They said, you cannot enter. And she said, but I really need to use the bathroom. That you may not enter. She said, well, you'll have to arrest me then. She walked in and had just gotten to the sink to wash her hands. She didn't have time to use the toilet. She went to wash her hands. The state troopers followed her in, handcuffed her, took her out. And I thought that was the most brilliant form of civil disobedience. That's right out of the playbook dating, obviously to the civil rights era and anti-Vietnam protests, but also all the way back to Henry David Thoreau in his protests against the Mexican-American War. Marcy mentioned, I thought it'd be fun to do this in the Capitol building. But the problem is that, the people like Representatives Nancy Mace or Marjorie Taylor Greene and others would connect such a protest. They would connect to Congressional Representative Sarah McBride, Delaware, who is the nation's first and now only openly trans congressional representative.
I will visit you if I go to DC next year sometime, because I'm getting active with some people on some federal stuff.
Oh, fantastic.
And thank you for doing all that you're doing, Tommy. It all needs to be done. Appreciate
it does. It's been interesting learning how activism works. I've never been an activist. I've always, thought of myself as a decent human being who believed that racism, homophobia, and gender discrimination and so forth are all bad and immoral and so forth, and conducted my private life and public life and against those outdated and anachronistic behaviors. But I'm learning firsthand as a trans activist how there's effectively these two approaches. You can be the Sarah McBride type who works quietly behind the scenes to try and change minds, sometimes one at a time, sometimes many at a time, by working within the system to try and gain power, to then leverage that power to improve the lives of trans people or other minorities. Or you can be more like a Marcy Rennigan, in your face, and unlike Marcy, sometimes super, super loud and angry in your face, not so polite. And I have met many people like that. I have marched with many people like that in DC, and I don't begrudge them or the other form. I find myself able to do both. I'm happy to march and yell and scream, but I'm also happy to work behind the scenes to try and get things done in a quiet way. What I will never do is engage in any form of violence, whether it's destruction
Of course.
of property or physical attacks on human beings. It's sad, to see how in the right wing of this country will always monopolize physical attacks as evidence of how dangerous trans people are.
So, how is being a woman full-time different from what your expectations were?
Two things. One, estrogen is a bitch. And two, makeup is a hassle. I try and purify myself for today's video call, but usually I don't wear much makeup, if any. And, I haven't worn a corset in ages. I still have some, but are you kidding? Why would I wear a corset, even a body cincher? And sometimes I hate wearing a bra. I can't wait to come home after a long day wearing a bra and take it off. And I even go camo sometimes because that just feels right. So Yeah, all the burdens of being a woman, whether it's, the pressure to present oneself as attractive, that's a burden that most men don't have. And I find myself, and this happened at my former employer, I found myself sometimes in meetings totally ignored. I was the invisible middle-aged or elderly woman in the back of the room. I found that during that sabbatical when I spent half the year road tripping across the southern United States. I didn't have a death wish, as some of my trans friends and family members thought I had. I did put a American flag on my rear bumper, American flag sticker on my rear bumper to ward off the crazies. Of course, it was a Prius, so maybe that didn't make any difference. But I I
Mhm.
found myself at these historical sites. That's really why I did the trip, was to visit historical sites. And I was often totally ignored. People were, they're going about their business, and not until maybe I opened my voice and I heard a sort of deep voice that they'd say, wait a second, that woman has a really deep voice. And they might
Mhm.
ponder about whether or not I'm trans, but then they might say, no one would be walking around the USS Alabama in Mobile Bay, Alabama, who's trans. No trans person would dare do that. But there I was.
Well,
So
and you didn't have Will Ferrell and a TV crew.
yeah, I didn't have a Hollywood celebrity. I did have Cash. Cash is what I nicknamed my acoustic guitar, which I brought with me to
Oh.
perform at open mics, including 3 in Nashville over the week I stayed there. And that was good fun.
We talked just in the introduction a little bit about the punk bands you were in to begin with, and how the music has kind of been a lifeline. We haven't talked about that yet, but is there
Oh
anything
my
you want to say
gosh.
about that?
Yeah, so when I moved to New York, I went from being a very happy child to a very unhappy child. Some of it had to do with the fact that my true gender kept pushing to get out, but it also had to do with the fact that the kids at my hoity-toity private boys' school in New York City were, the vast majority of them were really nasty to me and to some others. I just needed something to cheer my spirits, and rock and roll was that thing. I really was able, it was an outlet for my anger to be able to
Mm.
just yell and scream or try to sing with Led Zeppelin or
Hmm.
Queen or Kiss, whatever it might be, or a lot of blues rock, which I really liked, Cream and classic blues bands, British invasion bands, The Who, so forth. And then I fell in love with punk. When I was 14, I discovered punk and started listening to bands like The Clash, the Sex Pistols, the Ramones. And it's a
Hmm.
funny story. In 1979, was walking around the Bowery in the Lower East Side of New York in my Ramones outfit, which is basically torn, ripped blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and a black leather jacket. And Sunday morning in the Bowery, not a lot going on. At the time, there were a lot of homeless in the Bowery, and there have been for at least a generation of what New Yorkers call the Bowery bums. So, but I'm just walking down to go to Chinatown and maybe pick up some things, some records in Greenwich Village, and this car pulls up alongside. It's a convertible, and this man, a middle-aged man, looks at me and says, "Hey, you want a job?" I'm like, "Wow." No,
Yeah.
I don't need a job. He's like, no, you want a job? I said, what job? I'm a student. I don't need, I'm not working. Oh, anyone wants a job? And I said, well, there's lots of homeless people around here. And he's like, no, someone else who wants a job. And then he got frustrated and drove off. Well, it wasn't until 3 years later that I realized that the Ramones dressed the way they do because the bass player, Dee Ramone, had been a gay hustler. He had been a hustler with these actually straight men or young men,
Right.
or teens, who would happily offer, a gay man to give them a blowjob for, 10, 50, $100. And I was like, wow, you learn something every day.
Ooh,
Anyways,
that wasn't the job you wanted.
that was not a job I
Yep.
needed or wanted. No, no. Um, So yeah, so music in my teens and early 20s was really important. I played after college, and I played in bands during high school and in college. And then after college, played for 3 years in a punk band full time. We toured the country, we recorded and put out 2 albums, to cassette. We were played on college radio and independent radio stations all over the country. And that was really fun. A lot of people say, why didn't you transition at that time? You could have transitioned, grown your hair long and no one would have cared. And I said, yeah, but I was petrified already, and I and also I knew that if I came out that time, I would have lost my family, my parents, my siblings, my friends. This is the early 80s. It just was a leap too far. And I never would have been able to have the career I eventually had. I never would have gotten married, had amazing kids. So I have no regrets about not transitioning at that point. Had I had the opportunity to transition today as a 20 something, I absolutely would have, or as a teen, I think I would have
I
done that.
totally agree with you on that. Completely.
Yeah.
It's a very different time. Back then, you were guaranteed no career,
Yeah.
no friends, no family would come with you. You would be on your own. And
Yeah.
essentially, you'd be living underground in Manhattan
Right.
or San Francisco.
Yeah. I think I would have moved to San Fran.
Likewise. I was in love with the Grateful Dead.
Oh, interesting. My boys turned me on to country rock around 2012 or 13, and I found country rock sort of interesting. But I really got involved with country rock when my marriage broke up because, believe it or not, those silly songs about pickup trucks and
Your dog dying.
relationships, yeah, it spoke to me. It spoke to me. So I, in 2015, created an alter ego named Alison Young. And your listeners or viewers can find Alison Young on the international World Wide Web at AlisonYoungCountryMusic.com. And I have 3 full albums to my credit with original songs, with great backing band going on for me. Some of the songs speak to the trans experience, particularly on my second LP, Trans American, featuring the yet to be hit Trans American. Kind of proud of that song. I kept trying to convince Boston Pride to let me sing it at the Pride Festival in June, but maybe someday I'll get an invite to perform at some trans festival.
And you've got some great music there, Tommy.
Well,
Beautiful
thank you.
music. Yeah, very
Country
original.
music and the trans community, however, don't seem to be a real fit. And I didn't see a lot of country folks whooping it up at DC Pride or Boston Pride in the years before. But I do love performing. In fact, I just played at a singer-songwriter workshop on Sunday, and they put me in touch with some open mics. So I'll probably go do some open mics. It's interesting playing in Nashville. The way Nashville do open mics is kind of cool. There's usually 3 or 4 of you on a stage together, and the other musicians are expected to sometimes contribute to the song being performed by the by one performer when they do their turn. And I found it so interesting. I was performing, a song, and all of a sudden, someone starts playing a little lead guitar, and someone had a banjo and is playing banjo to it. It's a wonderful thing.
Well,
Musicians,
cool.
of course, most musicians are really open-minded folk who had no problem with me sharing the stage with them or being at an open mic with them. I really appreciated on that, particularly that cross-country road trip, and particularly in Nashville. I think it, unfortunately, may be a little different now. Well, literally, the law in Nashville changed. The Tennessee legislature made it illegal to perform if you're born as a man and perform in women's clothing. I mean,
Really?
Tennessee has regressed to the 19th
Oh, yeah.
century. It's unbelievable. Now, is the law enforced? Not really. I am aware of some trans performers. In fact, a dear friend of mine who is the first openly trans person to perform on the stage at the Grand Ole Opry. I won't mention her name, but I can tell you he doesn't think the organizers realize that he's trans. He's older, in his late 60s, early 70s maybe. And so, it's hard to police that law as it is as hard to police bathrooms, right?
Exactly.
I actually, on my road trip, I used the ladies' room in the Tennessee State House. In fact, because as a historian / history teacher, I love going to safe houses because they have wonderful history. So I was looking for the ladies' room, and I went down the end of this hall and found the governor's office. And I poked my head in and said to the secretary, Where's the ladies' room? And she's, oh, down the hall, darling, on your left.
Well, that's why some of these laws are so ridiculous. That they must be passing them for effect. It just doesn't make any sense.
It really doesn't.
So let me ask you one other question. What surprises you most about your life?
That I am here speaking to you at this particular moment. That is, incredible. I mean, I wake up every day and express gratitude internally for the person I am today, that I am able to be this person. Never in a million years, if you'd asked me as a 11-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 26-year-old, even a 46-year-old, that I could possibly be a woman and live my life as a woman, I would have said, "Are you crazy? You're insane. No way." Um,
Until
so
10 years ago, I'm right there with you.
yeah,
Never thought it would be possible. Dreamed of it my entire life.
right.
So tell me, it seems like you're full of so much joy and life and love.
Thank you.
How do you see it? How do you feel as being a person who can be here as your authentic self?
Well, obviously, this particular moment, we face a daunting task to preserve the progress that the trans community has made over decades,
Well,
if not centuries.
Mhm.
This current administration and its supporters in Congress and small towns or big cities across America really have it out for us. And there are two paths forward for the trans community. I take solace in the history of the broader queer community. Particularly since moving to DC, have tried to learn a lot about LGBTQ history. I've made a lot of friends in the gay community, many older gay men who survived the AIDS crisis
yep.
and have flourished as artists, as academics, educators, businessmen. So in that queer history, of course, you have this famous Stonewall. I won't call a riot because a riot is a police term
No.
or a disorganized protest or civil disorder. I will call it the Stonewall uprising, which is how I wish others would refer to it. Um,
Exactly.
the Stonewall Uprising in 1969, of course, led to the first Pride Parade a year later in New York City, and all sorts of legislation that emerged in cities or municipalities, and in some cases states across the country. But then you had the backlash, right, in the 80s, particularly as the AIDS epidemic spread. And it was brutal for not only, of course, the danger of contracting HIV, the sickness, but the loss of friends, the loss of, and then the failure of society, the heartlessness of the Reagan administration
Oh, God,
and
yes.
conservatives. Yeah, it was brutal. But as the epidemic came to be less virulent in the late 90s and the gay community recovered, you saw society begin to take a closer look and realize that gay men and women are worthy of society's respect and love and acceptance, full acceptance. And you, of course, got Massachusetts, which I proudly was a resident of at the time, legalized same-sex marriage. And then you get this famous Supreme Court ruling doing the same for the entire country. That's the good news. And my hope is that the transgender community has a similar experience, that the current government is stymieing in its efforts to erase us, a transgender community, and that in the administrations to come, also not only at the federal level, at the state level, we see protections either restored or more protections given to the trans community and a greater acceptance in the hearts and minds of ordinary Americans. And I do think Americans are capable of a lot of goodness. I did not have any negative encounters, actually just one, but I'm not going to dwell on it. I had, nary any negative encounters on my trans-country road trip, trans-American trans-country road trip in 2019. I found, whether it was diners in Black communities in South Carolina or barbecue joints in Texas, I felt people were good. Even if they read me as trans, they weren't like freaking out. Now, a lot of that has to do with confidence. You have to project confidence. Because
Oh,
confidence projects
absolutely.
confidence in the person that you're
Mhm.
engaging with. But also, the story of this country is the arc of liberty, the famous arc of liberty that bends upwards. There are dips, but generally that arc has moved upwards from the founding of this country in 1776. We have seen the extension of liberty, a broadening of the franchise, first to white men, then to the war that ends slavery and extends the franchise or the right to vote to Black men. And then in 1920, the vote extends to women. And then in 1924, Native Americans recognized as full citizens of the United States. The list, it continues to expand, and we have over the last 50 years experienced one of those periods of significant expansion of liberty. And all of a sudden now in the Trump era, we're seeing an attempt to erode that progress. And we need to, I think, do our best as individuals to fight that push against us. The dark story is, of course, Nazi Germany, which replaced a sort of infant democracy, the Weimar Republic of Germany, which was the most liberal, had the most liberal constitution in Europe at the time, granting women far more rights than any other state in Europe and including the United States, and also was generally LGBTQ friendly. Berlin became
Oh,
the
Berlin was
queer
in the
capital.
20s was a haven.
Yeah, it was queer capital for Europe and the United States.
Magnus
Magnus
Hirschfeld
Hirschfeld, right?
had the Institute for the Study of Gender and Human Sexuality, and
Exactly.
they did the first sex reassignment surgeries there.
Have you seen the film that he made called, oh shoot, it was made in 1919. You can find it on YouTube. It's a feature film. It's a story of an older gay man who's an actor who falls in love with a younger man who's also gay. It's so poignant. It's a silent film. On YouTube, you can find a version with English transcriptions rather than German. And some of the footage was destroyed by the Nazis when they ransacked the Institute in
Mhm.
1933. But what survived is what you see in what remains on YouTube of this film. And so there's some gaps in it. But it's a story that does resonate today,
Yeah.
resonated with me deeply. I was in tears at the end of this film. But you know, Nazi Germany went down a dark path, and
Right.
gay men were among the very first victims of the Nazi genocide. Um,
Hmm.
and we could go there. I don't doubt that. I don't begrudge anyone in the trans community who decides it's time for them to leave. They have to do what they feel is right, and only they can understand their own circumstances. But for me, I remain hopeful, and I remain committed to this fight for our future. And the work you're doing with this podcast is brilliant, and hopefully will go a long way to.
Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you for doing this.
I learned during my first week or two of living full time in a brand new community where I knew no one. Conversation and being open, vulnerable, and sharing made a huge difference for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and that's what we're all about here too, Tommy. And thank you for being part of this today. Any last words that you want people to help relate better to people who are transgender?
I do wish the best to all your viewers and to anyone out there who is in the closet. I hope eventually at some point you're able to get out of the closet and to be your authentic self. I know it's scary. I've been there. Wendy and I, we might be getting up in our years, but it's pretty hard to forget what it was like when you were very young. And it can take a long time to sometimes to get where you are, but there are a lot of communities in the United States and even around the world that are very supportive. Never give up heart. And thank you, Wendy and Lynn, for this fabulous program. And hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Wendy, any last words before we close this for today?
It's been a pleasure talking with you today, and I definitely will look you up when I get to DC.
Great. All righty.
Oh, well, Tommy, thank you for sharing everything that you did today and, being so honest and your courage and sharing your fascinating stories and your perspectives. It's really been an absolute pleasure to have you on our podcast today.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much.
Well, and we will post the link to your music to Alison Young, and it's Alison with one L in case people are just listening and not wanting to look this up, but Alison Young Country Music, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
.com.
And if you want to contact Tommy, contact us here through Demystifying the Transgender Journey. So to the audience today, thank you for joining us. I know you've enjoyed this. So share it out with other people who need to understand or want to understand more about the transgender journey. And be sure and subscribe. Help us build our audience. You know, that's what the little bots need is subscriptions and likes. Give us those likes and share comments with us. We will respond. We love to hear your comments and we will respond to those. So, you know, Tommy's story is just so powerful and such a reminder of the strength that it takes to live authentically and the impact that one person can have on so many people. So we're really grateful that she shared her story today and hope it inspires you, our listeners, to keep listening, to keep learning, and to lean into your own authenticity, living your own life. So as always, this is Lynn Murphy, your host, and Wendy Cole, your other host. And as we always say, stay curious and stay kind. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of our fascinating interviews. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind.